Today's news. Journalists commemorate late journalist Elmar Huseynov. Human rights defender sentenced to 2 months of pretrial detention for interference in 2010 elections. Nemat Panalu refuses to testify in the absence of media representation at hearing. Event on World Press Freedom Day. Former governmental official claims he faces fraud. On May 3rd, World Press Freedom Day, a group of journalists visited the grave of the late journalist Elmar Huseynov. Huseynov was the editor of Monitor magazine when he was murdered in front of his house in March 2005. Editors and representatives of media organizations today gathered to commemorate the journalist who lost his life standing up for press freedom in Azerbaijan. Director of Tehran Information Agency, Mehman Aliyev, said that the press freedom situation is deteriorating and that this has been recognized internationally. Attacks on journalists rose this year after a brief respite during recent years. Azadluk newspaper editor Ganimat Zahid declared that even in the face of danger and repression, the free press is continuing to fight for free opinions. Political expert Leila Aliyeva added that freedom of speech and expression is not only a priority for journalists, but also for society as a whole. Everyone needs to come together to protect this right. Azadluk newspaper columnist Rovshan Hajiev called upon Ombudsman Elmira Suleymanova to start doing her duty as a defender of human rights and freedoms of journalists. Sabir Huseynov, father of Elmar, said that the president had promised to solve the crime within 40 days, but 7 years have passed since the murder, which remains unsolved. The crime is not likely to be addressed by the current regime, he said. U.S. Embassy Press Secretary Keith Bean congratulated Azerbaijani journalists on May 3rd, World Press Freedom Day, and wished them success in their struggle against the existing problems. IRFS journalist Idrak Abbasov commented that assaults against journalists and bloggers have increased recently, naming Bakhtiar Hajiev and Jabbar Sabalanlı, who are active on social networks and are now behind bars under what Abbasov deemed to be false charges. He reminded people that although the European Court of Human Rights ruled for the immediate release of journalist Enula Fatulayev, he is still in prison. Elmar Huseynov's murderers have not been brought to justice. Human rights defender Vidadi Iskandarov has been sentenced to 2 months of pretrial detention as he awaits trial for charges placed in November of last year, which accused him of interference in the parliamentary elections. An appeal was filed against the decision, reported Iskandarov's attorney, Akif Alizadeh. Iskandarov was transferred from the Baku City General Police Office temporary detention prison to Baku Investigative Prison. Vidadi Iskandarov has stated that he is not pleading guilty to the charge brought against him. He spoke with television news about the developments in the country during the parliamentary elections and the illegal activities of the General Prosecutor's Office. Following this, the Investigation Office for Serious Crimes launched a criminal case against him for interfering with the voting process, said the lawyer. Vidadi Iskandarov ran in the November 2010 parliamentary elections as a candidate from Agdash, Goychay election constituency number 89. Human rights defender Vidadi Iskandarov was arrested during the April 17, 2011 opposition protest in Sahil Park. He was subsequently sentenced to 15 days of administrative detention. Today, the Nasimi District Court held a trial on the case of Azerbaijani National Statehood Party chairman Nemat Panalu and his friend Ceyhun Farzulayev. Judge Elman Ahmadov presided over the hearing. The hearing had been scheduled for 11 a.m., but the judge opened the proceedings an hour early at 10 a.m. The journalists who arrived in time for an 11 o'clock start were not allowed in. Nemat Panalu and Ceyhun Farzulayev refused to testify in protest against the lack of media presence. The next hearing will be held on May 17th. Nemat Panalu and Farzulayev were arrested on a charge brought by Eldar Razayev for hooliganism committed with a weapon. The Baku Appeals Court upheld the charge. If he is found guilty, Panalu could face 5 years in prison. Panalu's supporters claim that the real reason for his arrest is his journalistic activity. Prior to his arrest, he wrote a number of articles criticizing the government, published in various press outlets, including the Nota PS. The Council of Press held an event to mark World Press Freedom Day today. A UNESCO representative opened the event, and discussions followed. With very few exceptions, speakers did not touch upon media problems or the illegal harassment of journalists. Press Council Chairman Aflutan Amashov and other representatives reported that there are no problems with licensing newspapers. The speakers did say that there are serious problems with racketeering in Azerbaijani journalism. Ayna Zerkalo, newspaper's editor-in-chief Elchin Shikli, said that Azerbaijani media lacks a normal competitive environment, and that if these repressions continue, only 5 or 6 print media outlets will be able to operate here. Bakı Haber newspaper editor Aydin Guliev said that the increasing self-censorship of journalists is not normal international practice. Guliev condemned the violence and legal violations against journalists. Upon seeing the cameras, Press Council Chairman Afutun Amashov evaded questions about the physical assaults against Azadlık newspaper employees. Seymour Hazi and Ramin Deko. After the cameras went off, Amashov said that it was the responsibility of the Media Rights Institute director, Rashid Hajali, to liaise with law enforcement agencies on these issues, though he added that he would be speaking with the police today. He finished with a statement confirming that the Press Council was interested in solving these crimes and bringing the criminals to justice. A former employee of the Cabinet of Ministers, Chingiz Guliev, held a press conference today at IRFS Press Center to speak about legal violations he faced in law enforcement agencies. Guliev says he was employed at the Cabinet of Ministers from 1995 to 2001. His problems began when he got involved in the arrangement of the defense of a person who killed 2 people in a car accident. Specifically, that person requested Guliev to mediate between him and the sufferer's side and reach a truce. Due to this contact, a communication started between the defendant and Guliev gave $40,000 to the defendant to launch a shared business. But when there was a need for money to reach a truce with the sufferer's side, the defendant insisted that it should be paid by Guliev. Additionally, Guliev had familiarized the defendant with an Iranian citizen who has lived in Azerbaijan for a long time. Later, the 2 people, thinking that Guliev is employed at the Cabinet of Ministers, were constantly demanding money. Consequently, Guliev appealed to the Interior Ministry, and the appeal was investigated by Nasimi District Police Office No. 21. The criminal case was launched under fraud charges, and a 2-year investigation confirmed that the defendant is in debt to Guliev. However, the opposition side succeeded in the annulment of the 2009 investigation and the launch of a new investigation. He described it as a pressure against him.